All right, 3, 2, 1, go. I don't have to because we're already being recorded. Okay.
Go
Sending
ahead.
live. So, by the way, we're on a delay over here. So, if I say anything nasty, I'm sure my wonderful producer Manpreet is going to beep me out. Okay, really quickly. So I'm Ralph Rivas. You saw that earlier. You are here at the understanding platforms, and of course, we saw some of the slides you've probably been seeing all day already today, where the next SPNA is going to happen in Vegas, and of course, our beautiful sponsors. Allow me to introduce myself. Please allow me to introduce myself. I'm Ralph Rivas, like it said in the main slide. I'm a Microsoft aficionado since 1980. My MCP number is 4 digits, so yeah, I'm pretty old. That's not a vanity MCP number. Been a consultant since 2000. Oh my God, 20 years. And with Magenic, the company I'm with, since 2002. All right, and so yeah, I guess I am in the dark side all this time. How did that happen? I'm the accidental SharePoint guy. Yes, accident because somebody said, "Hey, this .NET Nuke is something. Can you do SharePoint?" And then all of a sudden, I became SharePoint. Solution architect by day, a data entertainer by night. As you can see, I'm sort of practicing my skill next door. I am what I call myself a collaboration evangelist, but that's really just saying an Office 365 fan. And I am on the mentoring path, which is what brings me here today. And as you can see in the picture, that is another thing that brings me a joy as well. Here's the raffle. Don't forget the raffle piece that's over here. If you haven't done so, don't forget to visit the vendors and the booth sessions. Basically, submit your answers into the raffle. You need 5 correct answers to win. Go ahead, take a screenshot if you have not yet. And really quickly, up and top, I'm saying and showing the charity page. And these folks really deserve your help, and I do highly recommend going through it. Sorry if I'm going through fast. After all, you can watch this on the video later. You can slow me down if you need to. Let's move ahead. All right, so what's this all about then? Our course, Understanding Power Platform Licensing. Phil Worrell actually tweeted and said, "Oh my God, this is the toughest session I've seen in the Microsoft Virtual Conference." I kid you not. This is actually out there on Twitter. Go check it out. It's for real. So for all of you here, welcome to the toughest session ever in this conference. Oh my gosh, you're here, and it's an amazing thing. All right, so what is this session really about? All right, it's about licensing, right? So our goals are very simple. We want to understand those cost nuances and the various scenarios and combinations. We want to apply what's learned. We're going to have some scenarios on this little webinar and just try things out. What's in scope: Power Apps, Power Automate, the core, virtual agents, which is fairly new. Those add-ons, CDS, AI, the portal. We'll talk about that. And of course, any latest updates that are in there. Let's just say the latest updates are incorporated into it. So first, let's let Microsoft speak. And you guys can take a snap of this or start looking at yourselves. As you can see, each of the main areas have their own pricing page. Virtual Agents doesn't seem to have its own. You go to the top and you're there. But most importantly, at the bottom is that key PDF download, that one you see right there. All right, go ahead and you can take a look at that while we're doing that. Let's talk about these. Pricing is separate from the licensing information. This is very, very important, not meant to confuse you or to force you to look at several places, right? The idea, again, because the main pricing hides those nuances and the main price over here, you want to be able to see those items over there and be able to get them to be what you need to get, right? Well, let me back up there, because this slide suddenly started going fast on me. I guess my timing started coming through. One moment, please. Oh boy, let me back up. Let me go back to the previous slide for just a second. All right, so as I come right over here, you can see on the main pricing links, the pricings can be found on the admin screen. If you are powerful enough to be an administrator, you can go ahead to the admin.microsoft.com, your admin portal, to go see what's there. I just wanted to make sure that you've seen that. There's some very important things, that there are nuances and other plans that are represented. Just want to make it very clear that prices are separate because of regional issues and everything else, and that because those prices are hidden, are hiding essentially the license nuances. We want to go take a look. So let's go ahead and start looking at things here. Quickly, we want to understand first some things ahead of time, what your license program is and everything else. I'm just going through this very fast because I want to get through the meat of things. Things that you may want to consider if you're doing volume licensing, any other kind of licensing you have, they affect what you have. Because at the end of the day, it doesn't matter what it says and what is published. What these other pieces that you have over here, including who your rep may be, could affect what you do in pricing. So whatever we show you is what maybe generally folks will have. But just keep in mind that how you work it out. Remember, even if you're just one or two people in your company, there is a rep somewhere for you to go get. All right, let's quickly dive into Power Apps and dive in there quickly. Let's take a look at some free stuff over here from Microsoft. We have the oh my gosh, we're going very, very fast over here. So let me try to pause things a bit and go back to the previous slide. You may see this screen right over here as you get into a lot of these pages, and this one probably is a very nice thing to do, but a lot of folks might think that you might be able to use this to get free services, and no, and I just want to make it very clear that a small print does repeat the same information. This is for healthcare, government, nonprofits, and educational sectors. If you're doing that right now and you're not getting it for free, you should make sure you're taking care of that. So let's take a look at the pricing. Here's the two main, for Power Apps, the two main pieces, right? The running single apps and running unlimited apps. And I'm using US dollars for now because I have that on my system. All right, so what are you going to get? Let's take a look at these very carefully. The single apps is the per user per month. Individual users running specific applications, running. Let's remember that term, run. And the other concept of running unlimited apps, again, users running as many apps as you want. The other one, one application, one Power App. In this case, running unlimited applications. And then we have the concept of what's called seeded apps. Seeded apps, basically you're bundled with Office 365 and Dynamics. And this is very important because it means that you're getting this ability without having to pay for those two sets of licenses. So if you're doing something with Office 365 or Dynamics, and all you're dealing with is, say, extending it and doing this stuff, that's what you get. Let's take a look at what we get for that first type over here. And let me quickly show you. I wish this would stop over here. Right, we have over here in the let me do this really quick, folks. Just a moment. Just a really quick stopping off the presentation for just a moment. I will go to my slideshow and come over here and come right back right at it. Okay, here we go. All right, so let's take a look at that very first type of app. This is one of the first things that I wanted to notice over here. And notice that we said apps, like run a single app. Actually, it's two apps. And so for folks, and remember, this is not a technical discussion, but for folks that understand how the apps work, there's the concept of the canvas or the model-driven app. So either of those are part of this. Here we have the concept of the custom portal. And we'll talk about the portals a little bit later, but you have essentially one that you have. And the other one is the fact that for the common data service, essentially database file capacity over here, 50 megs and 400 megs respectively for files and data, all right, is what you get for this particular piece. This is going to be important as we come in later on. Let's remember this. All right, so let's look at that. For that little extra a month, what do you get? All right, the concept of unlimited apps. So the other one, they gave you two when they said one, but they really mean two. In this case, unlimited access to, to custom portals, unlimited. What does that mean? Can I have a lot of portals? Really quick, let me define that one. Unlimited in this particular case simply is up to capacity. If you run out of capacity, and in fact, this capacity down here, because you need actually about 1 gig of data to stand up an extra portal after the initial, you're going to run out of capacity quick, and you have to buy capacity. And so take a look over here. You notice, remember before it said like 50 and then 400, and now it says 250 and 2. Wait a minute. We went from one person being able to do 50 and 400, which seems like a lot, and then now unlimited, and I only get 2. That's for everything. In fact, that covers everything. The whole idea is because it's common data services. In the case of the one app, two apps, you're using the data almost like personal data for the personal app. In this case, it truly is common data. So you would, if you're architecting this, for example, think about you won't need as much space. The idea is Microsoft's trying to make it, let's just say, cheaper for everybody. So at a higher level, even though you have unlimited, they're giving you less quote unquote space on a per app basis, because you're less likely to use it, and because they just want to make sure it's as cheap as possible for you instead of reserving all that space. Remember, if they reserve space on Azure, that's taking up room where they could be charging someone else money for that, or charging you. All right, let's go now to take a look at that dynamic side, the overlap flavor. The overlap flavor in this particular case, this is, by the way, a lot of these are right off the licensing doc, where they go over and they check off on some of the same issues over here. The concept of Dynamics 365 and Dynamics 365 Enterprise is very important. A lot of the limitations that are shown over here are about whether or not you're essentially paying the premium version of it or just doing some basic applications. In a lot of cases, like say they utilize common data services, you'll see them used on both sides over here, mainly because it was CDS that came from Dynamics in the first place. So you get that, but there are some limitations to be sure. If anything, though, this is showing you that without having to pay that extra $10 or $40, which they were showing earlier, you get quite a bit of items within. So this is pretty neat. So just keep in mind, of course, Dynamics has its own cost. All right, so this is very important. These are the Dynamics pieces that qualify for that. There's about 14 different qualifying licenses. If you're part of these, again, it's in the document, you should be okay to use Dynamics instead of having to pay separate. The most common one, of course, is Office 365. So let's take a look at what's out of the box. Holy smokes, everything just disappeared from that one. Well, yes, if you have Office 365, you can do things sort of. Check it out. You can have unlimited Canvas apps, which is your common Power Apps, as long as all it's doing is it's playing with 365. That's actually pretty important because $10 or zero, $10 for 2 apps, or $40 for unlimited apps, or zero. But then not zero, right? You're already paying for 365, but only Canvas apps. If you're doing model-driven apps, in other words, you're being fancy, well, you're back to using the 10 and the 40. All right, accessing the custom portals. Well, you're in Office 365. You don't really need no custom portal. If you want that, you can ask for it, but you don't need that. We'll go into what portals are later on. The concept of the standard connectors, we have an appendix over here, which you'll go through. The standard connectors, there is a list of what connectors are. We'll discuss that. And of course, here's the big one. There are premium connectors, things where you're touching things outside of Office 365, not included. A whole bunch of stuff not included. There's Power Automate rights. Essentially, Power Automate has a similar situation. If you're on Office 365, it's included. And there is no CDS capacity at all. There is no data capacity if you're doing Power Apps over here. Well, if you're here, you'll probably be using SharePoint for your data. All right, makes sense? Let's continue. All right, so what counts as Office 365 licenses? Well, there's a whole slew of them. And everything from Business Essentials to the education versions, your E5, your E3s, call it, if it's in this list, it counts as Office 365. Let's look at that Appendix B. They call it as recent changes, but actually it's not so recent. It's what they added back in October. And this was interesting. This is the recent changes to premium. In fact, a lot of this little item here, this SQL Server being added to the premium area is what started my whole trip down learning how the licensing works. And perhaps like worrying that I had to get a PhD to understand this. It's because our IT reported in the tizzy like, oh my God, we're using SQL Server for our stuff. Now we got to pay for it. Oh, this is a disaster. So, oh my gosh. And so that means you need to have a premium connector or the per app per user plan. And this is a big deal because all of a sudden you went from zero cost to having to pay that 10 or 40, worse, that 10 per user or that 40 unlimited or whatever. We're talking a lot of money that had to come out. So that was a big deal. And by the way, you can find the connectors over here, and I have the link. If you can, we can share the slides later on, and be able to click on it. Or that's actually easy to find if you go to flow.microsoft.com. The connectors. I have the US link right there, but it will lead you to your own link if you follow it through. But this is important to understand the difference between premium and not. If it's premium, you need to use those per app plans. If it's not, you don't. Maybe you should re-architect, but maybe you have no choice. This is where it can make a difference. We'll discuss that in more detail. Let's talk about that portal finally. The concept of portal. Basically, it's a recent Power App resource with licensing that's similar to a lot of web portal applications. Keep in mind, it's not a SharePoint website. It's really its own system. So you're talking somewhere in Azure, there's an app or something that's taking up space and using up room. And don't try to fake it with SharePoint because, well, you can't. It has a specific use cases. And here's the thing. when you buy that $10, $40 piece, you will get this whether you like it or not, or whether you set it up or not. So whether you want to use it, you have to think about it. If you're going to use it, you have to think about the end user types that are coming at it. Do you have it because your idea is you're coming in with external users? Very common use for that portal is because you don't want them to have access to SharePoint, or you don't want to have access to Teams or these other places. You just want to have like a website, a web page for them to come in. So you'll have the concept of the external user, the anonymous user, and of course, potentially the internal user that's going to the same place to find the same information. Keep in mind, the internal user can probably get the Power App in another way. They don't have to come to a portal. But for the external, the anonymous, that makes a big deal. And of course, the licensing scheme affects what they're doing. An external user is counting the logins, how many times they're logging in a 24-hour period. Anonymous users, for each page view, they're actually counting. Well, let's take a look at that over here. The user rights basically comes over here. The Dynamics 365 folks, well, they don't have user rights for the portal. Why wouldn't they have user rights for the portal? Well, Dynamics 365 is the portal. So yeah, why would they not? Why would you have to give them user rights to something that they don't need because they have another place to get it? The enterprise folks, though, seem to have that license to be able to get in, to be able to find it. That seems a little counterintuitive. If it's available, then why does the enterprise folks have it? Well, most of that is so that they can work in other means. They can say work like their external customers say would work. Right, and of course we have the Power Apps per app per user. We saw that was given more directly, and the Office 365 guide, the same thing. Why would you need a portal? You have your own way of getting at the pieces. Oh, okay, so other things over here is some capacity. We talked about it. It's about page views, logins, and of course we'll have to cover this later because there's more detail to that. Let me quick checkpoint over here. Let's go see, are there questions sitting about? In the questions area. Questions. I see one published. And the only published is just me asking. Nobody's asking a question yet at this time, so it looks like we're good. We're going to continue straight on. All right, Power Automate. We're next with Power Automate. Power Automate pricing. Let's take a look at that. This one has been changed recently. So we have the per user plan, looks familiar, 15. We have now a 40, looks familiar too, but it's different. This is a per user plan with attended RPA. We're going to go through that in detail. Something special that was added recently for robotic process automation, but this was here before, the license by flow per plan. This, again, caused a tizzy. These are the big pieces, and let's look at that in a little more detail. Let's see what we get. The per user plan, the concept over here, you saw, remember earlier, I told you to remember about running the Power App. This is an individual user creating flows, right? So the per user plan here is the user actually creating these flows and putting them up there, but they're creating them for themselves. In this case, they can create as many as they want for themselves. Very important. For themselves, they can create as many as they want. Big difference. It means no one else can use it, just them. The per user plan with attended RPA is essentially the same thing, but now they can actually attach RPA or the attended RPA or bots to make it work with. And now comes the other side, the per flow plan, where there's only 5 flows per month in packages. This is not creation. This is implementing the flow. So someone builds a flow, so anybody, right? But this is actually implemented flow. The concept of reserved capacity means somewhere in the Azure land, they're making capacity for this thing to run. However it needs to run. It's probably logic apps right underneath the covers, right? And it's set to happen and set to work. But unlimited users can be served by this. Remember that first one. The flow is only serving that one person. It might touch things, but it's only serving that one person. Whereas in this case, that flow moves around, and this is bolded in their document, and it's serving however many users. So if I set up a flow per month, all right, and it's like coming off a SharePoint list and 100 people are touching that SharePoint list. Well, there's my flow for those different 100 people that are out there. All right. Then, of course, they have the concept like the other ones, the seeded flow. So what's bundled? Again, why pay the 15 and 40 or any of those if whatever you're doing is only going to stay within the realm of Office 365 and Dynamics? That's another important distinction. So let's look at the difference. This is one of the, again, the tizzy that was caused. Some of last year's plans, what they used to look like. This is what the old plans used to look like. Sorry if this is a little small. So we have, there was a free version of the flow. There was flow plan number 1 at $5 a month. Ooh, that was pretty cheap. And flow plan number 2 at $15 a month and all these runs. The big difference, the older plans had this monthly limit. And take a look at, you can see those limits, 750 runs, 400, 4,500, 15,000. And of course, they have the ability to add capacity. So if you wanted more runs, you want to be able to do more stuff, you can add capacity. While in the latter, the new one, it's a day capacity, and you'll see that. The new entry port, of course, now is $15 versus free. All right. Well, free, technically speaking, was in what was included with Power Apps or what was included with Office 365, etc. So, but the entry point is not 5, it's now 15 because they gave you stuff. But what did they give you in its place? Here's now the differences. Check it out. Remember that monthly? Well, for the per user, it's 5,000 daily API requests. Daily, sir. Which, of course, that you can add capacity to as well. And unlimited flows. Well, how about on the per flow offer? Well, we saw the minimum was 5. But in this case, it's 15,000 daily, but that's spread out among the 5. If you need more, you have to buy more capacity. So in essence, this guy sort of gets a lot more, unless of course he creates tons of flows, then he's really getting a lot less. This guy has for 5 divided into this 15, all right? And so he has at least a minimum bottom level per unit if they were all sharing. That's a huge difference from what they used to say. So they're claiming in this case that, well, yeah, we're giving you more for your money. All right. Very important concept over here is the concept of the enabled top-level flows. This is how to determine whether or not you're going to need a license or get charged for a license or that kind of important information you'll probably want to figure out. So this is important, especially for the per flow plan when you're trying to figure it out. Of course, the flows that count, you got to figure out what that on the per flow case, the concept of scheduled flow. A flow that's like just something that runs on a schedule. I think that's pretty easy. An automated flow, we can go through this in a little bit more detail. What was called an instant flow, the business process flows, those are the flows that are touching like custom connectors and things like that. And remember, each additional unit, in this case, it's these little bundles of 100 at $100 in case of the US. The purchasing unit is not the same as purchasing capacity. All right, so when you purchase a unit, you're not going to get an extra 15,000 API runs or any CDS capacity or anything like that. That's separate. You're just purchasing the act of the flow itself, the actual extra capacity you have to pay for. Now, and here's a very important piece: child flows that are triggered by another flow does not need an additional license. This one is, maybe there'll be a test for this later, but this is important. So you have a flow. This flow in the flow itself calls another flow, and then calls another, and then those, and so on. They're all calling flows within their actual structure. All right. The whole thing is counted as one. So that counts as a single flow from end to end because it's a single transaction. What's a child flow that is not, that would cost you? Okay, so I have a flow that does a little automation. So I say it adds a file to a SharePoint list. In the SharePoint list is a trigger flow that itself does something whenever a new item is added. Well, guess what? That flow did not directly call that other flow. It did something that might have kicked off that flow, but that flow itself is a top-level flow. So that's 2 flows that you have. Well, could I have saved money? Yes, I could have made in my initial flow a main flow and then called the child flow directly instead of letting it kick off itself, and I would have saved that extra flow. Well, maybe this will come again later. All right, what do you get for those plans? Let's take a look. All right, so this is straightforward. Looks like the other one, and I think we've discussed some of these numbers that we saw over here. The concept of the RPA bots, we'll get that in more detail over here. The idea of like standard and premium connectors you will get if you're paying the extra money, you will get the premium access. Of course, you'll get your CDS access on top of whatever you have as well. And of course, your request limits are noted over here. And this concept of the AI service credits. Actually, we'll go into that one a little bit. Let's look at Power Automate with Power Apps. Now, the first bundle that would happen is, of course, if you have Power Apps and you're trying to do a flow, what happens? Well, in the old way, essentially, Power Apps license effectively included that license, period. There was no other way around. So you had it. There was no issue about whether there's no premium, there was no premium connectors, none of that. You had this, you have that. You're pretty much done. But in the new way, there's a little bit of a subtle difference. It is free to some extent, and these are the free issues. Flows that are limited in context to the Power App, the built-in trigger, flows coming in from another premium Power App. You've already paid, in other words, you paid the premium price on that Power App. Those are included, and flows that do not use premium connectors, just Office 365 type pieces. Anything outside of that, then you end up having to have both pieces. But for the most part, you'll find that the first issue of like, I have my Power App and I don't need to get a Power Automate license will be the case. All right, again, if it runs in context, a lot can be done. I think that's the takeaway that you want to have right from over here. All right, let's talk about those bots. Really quickly, I'm just putting this out here on this slide. We can go review to it later. I won't read it out to you. Just explaining what a remote processing automation is all about. This is actually in the documentation as well. It's what we're looking for is to understand the concept between the unattended bot and unattended bot. One where it's triggered by the explicit user action, or whether it's just happening somewhere else. And this is very important. When it's usually triggered by a user, it's actually happening at the user level, at their workstation, at their wherever that's happening, versus an unattended bot, which is happening somewhere else on Azure somewhere else. Let's look at those differences. One has a plan, that attended one. The other one does not. The other one's always has, at least until they change it, it's always going to be an add-on. So here's attended. All right. So unlimited flows, basically, it doesn't matter how many flows come out of this particular bot, whatever he has to do, he can have as many flows as he wants. No problem. All right. Essentially, you have 5,000 credits, and we're going to talk about that a little bit. And essentially, you have 5,000 API requests. In other words, if the bot talks to APIs about 5,000 times a day at the most. The unattended is just simply saying that we're going to give you this as an add-on. All right. And we're going to give you this 5,000 a month service credits. That's it. But you got to pay for it. All right. Let's continue over here. That's what we get with the attended. Okay, the UI flow authoring. So there's a whole screen for bot orchestration and management that's included in this particular offer. The bot must operate concurrently with the user. Okay, we saw that earlier. It's essentially the user's kicking it off, so the bot is working at the same time as the user is touching it. And of course, the bot can go ahead and run other discrete flows and do other things. That's all fine, but they're running sequential. There's not an async kind of situation going on over here. That would be considered unattended. In the case of unattended, all right, there's the add-on license, which again, you have one unattended bot, and it can do all the necessary functions. All right, and it basically just the bot's got to run somewhere, and it probably has to run in a VM or some sort of other resource somewhere, and that needs to be paid for separately. The bot is not just free, just running on its own. Any services or applications for the unattended bot is accessed must be licensed separately, whatever it's doing. It's just simple as that. All right, let's look again. Power Automate with Power Apps. If we're looking at that, as we can see, once we have Power Apps included, we can do just about everything. All right, so if you have your Power Apps and you have those licenses where you're able to do these things, the premium, you can do everything. This is a very simple slide because that's all it means. On Dynamics 365, it works the same way as with Power Apps, but the context now is Dynamics 365. And look, it looks the same way. Flow is like, let's just say, the most powerful engine underneath of Dynamics 365 itself. So it's what's essentially saying, if you're paying for that Dynamics 365 license, well, for heaven's sakes, you're able to do all these things, including the premium connectors. Have at it, because you're already a prize customer for us using Dynamics. What about Office 365? And this is an important distinction here, because now the bundles can make a big difference of whether or not to buy the app plan. And oh, whew, what happened? It all disappeared again, didn't it? This looks like the original apps piece over here. So workflows, the old way of doing things, that's what they called workflows. That's unlimited, of course, the same thing that you used to do, as long as it's just happening, say the SharePoint workflows, that sort of pieces that you do from that, no problem. The business process is not included here. That's essentially anything that goes outside or touches any other system outside of Office 365. Standard connectors make sense. That would be your SharePoint list, et cetera, et cetera. Your premium connectors, again, make sense. All those pieces that are just nothing to do with Office 365. So nice and simple. If you have your Office 365, you can use Flow for free under these conditions, right? So just pointing those pieces out. All right. What's important now is to understand what the trigger types are. All right, we talked about that earlier. What's going to trigger those flows? All right, so the concept of the automated flow trigger, when we said what the included flows are. An automated trigger flow, this is a webhook or polling event. All right, that's a very technical term for some that are not here for technical pieces, but that basically means that some other system somewhere is making it happen. An example would be SharePoint created. So SharePoint talks the same way an external app might talk. So SharePoint created or updated an item or an email came through. So that's an automated flow that's triggered. All right, an instant flow is triggered by the user. That means the user clicks on a button, a flow button, a Power Apps trigger, a SharePoint list for a selected item. They actually click on something that kicks off the flow. Right, so that's a direct action. So that's an important distinction. All right, if you remember, the automated flows have a certain way of coming through, and the instant flows usually will cost. Right, let's take a look. And here's the guidance over here. We want to use standard connectors wherever possible. We want to use automated triggers. If you're using automated triggers, remember the flow owner gets full license. Basically, the owner will setting up an automated trigger on a SharePoint list will have a full license, and basically you just have to watch the number of runs and you check out your capacity, API capacity. There's ways to do this, of course, in the admin screens. In the case of instant triggers, so remember that when we talked about those triggers, the automated triggers, the flow owner, single person, the instant triggers, each user needs a license. So I guess that would be the case where we would buy that multi-pack flow for the unlimited users being served, right? So those buttons, every time you hit those buttons and there's like 1,000 users hitting those buttons or making things happen, that's where you would get the flow in that bundle versus the automated trigger where it would be the guy working for himself, so to speak, on making that stuff happen. The case of the seeded apps is very important. Seeded apps can do instant triggers, but they do not lease a license. What does that mean? The seeded app, SharePoint list. If I'm a SharePoint list and I kick off something and that's all I'm doing, I don't need a license. Oh boy, that's a very big thing. A Power App trigger, though, would need a license for itself. So essentially, it's a Power App trigger. Well, if it's a Power App, then I have to deal with the Power App license that's dealing with that for that trigger. So that it negates the need of the flow license because you've already paid for the Power App license. So if I'm hitting a Power App button that happens to do a flow, well, it's an instant trigger, yes, but it doesn't need a flow license. All right, quick checkpoint. Nobody's asking questions, so everyone's understanding it, or everyone's really relaxed and having a nice time here. Let's continue. Power virtual agents. Let's move on. Let's check the time. The time check over here. Yes, we're doing actually pretty well. Power virtual agents. So Power virtual agents, the new kid on the block, and sticker shock. Boof, $1,000 per month. Oh my gosh, and 2,000 sessions. Geez, that's 50 cents a session. Or what's going on over here? It's like, well, this looks expensive. All right, and there's some reasons behind it. Let's take a look and see what do we get for that, all that money. Basically, it's $1,000, whether you use it or not. So, well, there's that. If you get it, you better be using it. Unlimited flows. Okay, so that's not so bad. It basically says anything that happens through your virtual agent, through this specific, very specialized bot that runs for you, and he happens to use thousands of flows to make his work happy. Doesn't charge you. It's part of it. All right. Now, however, there's the concept of the 2,000 chat session. This is basically each time someone talks to the bot. This counts as a session, and more on this will be coming right up. Of course, they may be stacked. Again, the capacity over here is you're buying by the amount of sessions because you're already getting unlimited flows. Right, and of course, there's the table that shows it. And as you can see, there's database capacity that's included with this because, after all, if you're doing bot type stuff and chatting and everything else, it's very likely you're going to need data to be kept and moved somewhere. Well, we're not going to take the data that you already have and use it up like that portal situation we talked about earlier. We're going to give you some space. Again, that capacity can be added. All right, so we must, according to the doc, let's understand what a session is. That's the interaction between customer and bot. That's a unit of consumption. All right, that's straightforward. The session begins when an authored topic is triggered. So I create a topic on making coffee, and someone says, hey, bot, I want to make some coffee. Hey, the session now is triggered at that point. All right, these sessions are referred to as build session, essentially when Microsoft bills you or starts counting it against your number of sessions used. All right, the sessions are deducted. So this is important. I'm testing. I'm just testing. Yes, I'm sorry. We're still charging you. There is no environment difference that they make between tests and production. If you want a different environment for that, you literally have to have a different tenant if you don't want to touch one or the other. All right, so keep that in mind. If you're testing like crazy, you could easily go over that 2,000 limit. A session ends when one of these followings happens. All right, customer's questions are answered. They say, "Oh, thank you, bot," or the question intensely closes. Away with you, bot. I don't like you. Or the bot's unable to answer. I'm sorry, I can't help you. Here's a link to a live agent. Essentially, at that point, the unit of consumption is considered completed, and it's ready to go. If it's hanging out, it'll probably time out. There is a timeout over here that's not mentioned, but it's likely the last piece that would consider a consumption. Let's start looking at some of these add-ons here while we're at it. No questions on the chart right now. As discussed earlier, there's the ability to add or gain capacity. All right, let's go through this for Power Apps. On the portal login, we talked about the portal. Again, the portal, if people are coming in to see your apps from the outside or anywhere else, the concept of 100 daily logins per month at an additional $200. You get about that many, around 200 or so. I think the number was up previously. Of how many logins they can come in. You can buy more of them if you have many more users. And of course, for those anonymous users, the concept of the page views. Every time they view a page, it actually costs. All right, 100,000 is a lot. All right, if you have a lot of people, and this is like a very public site, that can go very quickly though. Right, so at $100, they'll give you 100,000 page views. And they have the concept of the AI builder. The AI builder is essentially like the extra pieces for like what RPA came with and everything else, all these pieces. These units, and we'll talk about the units in a bit. These are $500 a month. That seems like a lot, right? But we'll try to figure it out because we saw RPA earlier for only $40 a month included. So we'll look at that. By the way, here's the link for the AI builder. It's powerapps.microsoft.com/AI builder. All right. What is a unit? A unit is what's called a million service credits. Earlier we saw 5,000 service credits that you were getting, and this is a million service credits. Ooh. All right. And by the way, this is an add-on to Power Automate. So maybe I should get this instead of paying that for 40 and only getting 5,000. Well, let's think about that for a moment. The service credits, by the way, is it's like their currency deducted at unfortunately different rates depending on what that bot is doing. Is it processing a form? Is it doing prediction? Whatever. There's no rate sheet. We don't know where this one is. We've been asking for this. Maybe one day they'll show us the rate sheet. But given that we don't know what that rate sheet is and we don't know really how it'll get used, this is the case where there needs to be a trial or a pilot. If you're going to be using this stuff, you're going to have to watch what happens and how much capacity you're using in a month, and then buy or give up credits as you see fit. Usually I would start at like the very basic minimums, and if you hit the wall, right, on testing, then you go and take a look and see what that is. There is, when you go to their, to the AI site, and we can show that, but if you go to the Power VA site, there is analysis that you can look and see what you're doing and how your capacity is going. Common data services, a very most often asked question on common data services. Remember, this is a premium item. Common data services is premium. Unless you're Dynamics 365, you have it. This is part of Office of that. But if you're Office 365 plain and simple, this is a premium service. But if you're going to be adding on to anything that includes this, here are the pieces. There's three very important concepts: log capacity, file capacity, and database capacity. Please remember this, because you might think, oh, we need more database capacity. You get that and forget that you need files are handled separately, or more importantly, logs. People forget about logs. There's logging going on, and sometimes there's a lot more of that than anything else. So sometimes even just you might need log capacity, period, because there's a lot of auditing and tracing going on. Very important concepts when you're trying to figure out your total pricing. You can centrally manage all of this from the Platform Admin Center, good old admin at powerplatform.microsoft.com, and there's an analytics screen, and of course the main purchase area in the main admin screens. Right over here in the Power Platform site, there's capacity. You can actually purchase capacity right from there. You don't have to go anywhere else to get it. And I see no questions on the list, so I'm actually proceeding very quickly. Let's go through some real life scenarios over here where we've changed the names to protect the innocent who have come up with some of this information. Let's take a look at a scenario. So first one, just one premium license. Oh my gosh, I think I put this in the wrong area. I gave the answer first, not so nice. Oh, I answered it first. Too bad. But here we go. The idea is a simple one, right? We have 5,000 people in a SharePoint list. The trigger is automated in an approval flow. The connector is used as premium. All right. So it's the connector on the flow calls Graph API. So how many Power Automate licenses do we need? This is the case where we need only just one premium license, right? That premium license could be either the individual for them doing their thing. In this case, though, it's 5,000 people in the SharePoint list, right? So if it was just one person doing it, we just need that first one. But in this case, the 5,000 people doing it, we need to have that 5 flow minimum, and we can serve at 5. So we might as well do 4 other flows while we're at it. But it's still a premium license. Oh my gosh, the same thing happened over here. I got to fix this slide. Let's go back and let's try this very quickly. This is another one over here. So individual citizen developer makes 2 flows. He's got Office 365 E3. Simple. He's got 20 users. They have permission to use this particular form. SharePoint form will trigger flow 1. Flow 1 calls in flow 2. It calls flow 2 directly. So how many licenses needed? Again, this is just one license, right? We could have a service account for this particular license, for example. Again, it's because I'm triggering the flow directly. I'm not calling SharePoint or something else which itself triggers another flow. Very, very important thing. Again, one license of whatever it happens to be. All right. Let's take a look at the other one. Uh-oh. Showing the answers again, but let's go back over here. The individual citizen developer, again, that $10 has that one over here. They want to talk to SQL Server, no problem, in the cloud. They have the license to talk to it, that's no problem. The question was, do they still need to get a Power Automate license at $15 just so they can talk to this? And remember, again, we talked about this earlier. No, they do not. It is included. This is the Power Apps seeded license, so that's a very important concept. All right, let's take some more cases, but this time we're going to talk about it a little bit. So we're starting off over here. It's a Office 365 freebie situation. Essentially, they've been a dozen people out of 10K size organization. They were making flows and apps to their heart's content. Remember that free concept? They made an app, they made a flow. No one was being charged anything. Everyone, power users, were just having fun with it. There's hundreds of flows sitting out there with all the different people. So few of them have ever been run that 750 run capacity that we saw earlier in the old way was never hit. None of these apps were ever promoted to others in any formal fashion, so just mostly everyone doing personal productivity. Let's discuss this. What's this going to cost now if we want to move this into the new run license? What's going to happen with all these people that have these flows? Well, let's just say a lot of these folks might actually start losing access to the ability to use these flows, depending on what those flows were doing. Some of these flows might just stop running or might prompt them to say, hey, what you're trying to do needs a premium connector. You're going to have to do this or that in order to get through. All right. What this situation is, if you know this is your situation, this is a case of governance. You come back here and it's essentially looking at the admin screens to find out where these flows are, or polling people to say, step up. If you have a flow that you're using and using a lot, or a Power App that you're using or using a lot, please step up and let's talk about it and figure out what we can do with that and make it work. All right. Essentially, what this is saying is, if this is going on, you have a Wild West situation, and you're going to have a lot of, well, if you don't already now, have a lot of angry users coming in wondering what the heck, what happened to my flows that happened, or maybe they'll never notice because they're not using it anymore. In that case, go in, clean up, and make it clean. All right. How about another? And how are we doing on time here? We're doing okay. The Flow Runner, critical business application. Last year, they had only 3 flows, but they ran it heavily. This is big time. All right. They are using Plan 2 capacity. That Plan 2 you saw earlier essentially means they're doing lots. They would sometimes hit that monthly capacity. Oh, geez. But usually pick peak periods only. But so they actually needed to buy capacity to make it work because it was a mission critical app. They're certainly definitely connected to a SQL database for updates, etc. All right. That's fine. There's hundreds of users all over the world, all over the globe using it daily. Oh, so this is pretty important. All right, let's discuss this one. All right, there's 3 flows. They're running heavily. All right, it's doing premium stuff. Hundreds of users. This should be easy, right? the five package, right, at $500 a month. Takes care of everybody. In this case, those monthly limits, if they were hitting those monthly limits requiring additional peak on the capacity periods, they're likely not going to hit these capacity issues again, because if monthly they were hitting that, but on a daily basis they were not even coming close to getting that. You are probably going to be just fine, because those dailies, as we saw, 15K, right, versus the other ones, they should be just fine. Again, getting capacity at this level is going to be a lot cheaper. All right, but this again gives you the opportunity to expand what you're doing and go further. All right, so they could be saving money in this particular case. Again, the heavy user is rewarded. The casual user is not. One more. It's the one app shop, we call it. Status reporting app. Talk to a database because the creator is also a former developer. Understood SQL better than SharePoint. And we keep coming back to using SQL because that's the most common premium connector that people like to use. All right. Inconsistent use between 20 and 40 project managers. Like every so often, these managers are up on deck and they're the ones who have to do status reporting. Not everyone has to do status reporting, and it's just once a week that has to be done. That's about 1,000 people in the tenant. They're mostly unaware that Power Apps or Power Automate even exist. So it's just these few people that are even using it. In fact, the developers there are using Azure AI for bots. PVA just came out after all. They're using it in Teams, so they're probably not keen on having to pay that so-called $1,000 a month for anything PVA-ish or even RPA-ish to make that work. So this is too close to home because it's actually very close to something I did recently and what prompted all this craziness. But let's discuss anyway. What should we do over here? So this is an app in particular. It appears to have a flow actually it does not appear to have a flow. Now I'll tell you what's going on over here. I'm not seeing a flow over here. We can ask them, is there a flow behind this, or does the app directly talk to the database and does just that? And it's like, the answer over here, by the way, is it just talked to the database. There actually is no flow over here. The reporting app talked to the database. Remember that, the reporting app talked to the database. That's the key words right over here. So there is no flow. Well, if I made this a flow to talk to the database, would that help? Nope, it's still a premium situation. Does that mean that if I get the premium, like the $10 for these 20 to 40, or maybe I will have 40 reserved and just get them all, will that work? Perhaps. Do I need the $40 one though to get all that extra one? Probably not. The $10 might be able to do it. Could I perhaps stop using SQL database and maybe use a different kind of system? Well, I can't use CDS because that's still premium unless these guys were using Dynamics. Then there's no point even going there. So can I just use SharePoint list? What are they doing in the database? Are they doing any joins or anything? Just to discover that no, they were not using joins. We could have a flattened version of that quote unquote database in the SharePoint list and be done with it. Aha. And now we can have our app without paying the extra money for anybody and just use that. Or maybe we could ask the developers, and there seems to be enough of them out there, to go ahead and let's build maybe something in SPFX or some other program that calls flow and does it in the back end using essentially the included triggers. Again, no cost, but of course there's going to be some development time. At any point though, in this case, there's probably going to be a little bit of refactoring, if at least to look at the concept of whether or not they want to pay $10 a month for 40 project managers or 20 and maybe pass around the license, whoever's using it at the time, or just simply take the money and take the time to just refactor and go SQL into the SharePoint list. All right. Hey, so if you got one to share, I see there's going to be a question over here in just a moment. We're going to take a look at over here just really quick. If you got one to share, there's an article you can contribute to. I'm going to answer that question in a moment. And here it is, the actual article, Power Platform. I actually did the webinar on this originally, or a talk, and then it became a webinar. And then they said, hey, it should be up there in the community docs. So this became an actual document that's up there. So if you go up there right now, it doesn't include the RPA stuff yet because that was just added in and it's still being approved. Microsoft needs to give its blessing. Or you can go there directly and contribute to GitHub. Yes, make your own version of this document. If there's something missing, something you want to see, some more examples, then something you can do. All right, Let's go take a look at that. Oh, that question was removed. Oh, it's published. No, even better. Let's see. Good session. What is the criteria for business perspective that we need to consider before deciding on the suitable licensing plan for the M365 products that best suit the client? So, business perspective. Business perspective is how much use there is, right? The biggest perspective is casual use, minor use, occasional use is more expensive than heavy use. That seems counterintuitive, but truly they try to reward you for heavily using something. So if you're going to have to get a license, it's going to be worth getting the license. Wherever possible, with your first business decision to make is to look at whatever's out of box, whatever's in context, whatever is available to you. All right, in the Office 365 or Dynamics world, usually if you're doing Power Platform stuff, you're probably in one of those environments. So take advantage of those first. If you're having to push these things out externally, like say to external customers, and you want to use that portal technology to have a Power App that's going to help, say, an external user of some sort, well, that's different. So now you're going to be doing something a little bit fancy. So expect to pay. All right, and just be aware that there's ways to save on how you pay, whether you buy things in a bulk or whether you buy things for individual users. If you're going to be helping a lot of users out there, you don't want to buy it for individual users, obviously. You want to get those package deals wherever possible. All right. I hope I answered that question. Let's finish up over here really quick. And yes, so it is the end of the session, and I think I'm doing it in just good time. By the way, the slides will be made available. I think we're going to post the slides. Let's go ahead, if my producer doesn't mind, in the announcements area, go ahead and post the link to the slide share right in there. I think I have it here somewhere too, but he might be faster than me. We'll see who's fast. Great, quick. Who can get there faster than anything else? Here's the slides. Chip, I think I'm the winner. There we go. There's the slide share. Obviously, there's going to be available here, but this is the actual slides. Those crazy slides, I'm probably going to fix them. So just watch that slide share because I'm going to update it with the working version of the animation. All right. Again, there'll be the recording. So if you need to watch this again, so you can get more info, my contact and everything else. Thank you for joining us.